Tuvalu before we kickstart our event. Please sit and watch. Maybe you can turn off the lights here so we see that better. Oh yeah, you know what to do, sorry.
It's like a paradise. It's really silent. You can feel the breeze, so fresh air early morning if you wake up. Everything is so pure. Then we are in the front line of a war. We are the ones who've been going and die actually because we are gonna be drowning.
And therefore, I think as responsible leaders in this area of the world, they should really come to this sense of mind and to help us to continue to live in our homeland. Because this is our land and God-given land. Of course, we are used to claim, and a lot of us Tuvaluans claim that God promised Noah there will be no more flood. But the way things are happening right now, the sea is rising, and indefinitely is rising.
We don't want to be called climate refugees. We'd rather be called climate forced migrants, because we are not refugees and we will not be refugees. We won't be leaving our shores.
There's no actually safe place to be hide. We can't run from those natural disasters. We can't. Things happen, that's it. If you survive, you're lucky.
We do not want to be relocated hazardly without proper planning and arrangements. Therefore, while we look at relocation as the last option, we need to lobby with the international community for an international convention that protects the rights of people who will be forced out of their countries because of climate change.
So no, it's better to stay in Tuvalu because it's our home and we're also thinking. No, it's like we're citizens. Yeah, and Tuvalu is like a home, so we need to die with our own country. That's the perfect word. When it things, we have to stay with our own country. Yeah. Not to migrate to other people's country because it's not our home.
We want to save Tuvalu, and we are urging the world to get actions on the Paris Agreement on climate change. And this is, we believe we can save Tuvalu and save small islands if the whole world, work collectively and as a community of nations to work on reducing greenhouse gases and keeping it down to the targets of 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial period. We need to achieve that in the shortest time possible, and the Paris Agreement is very strong on that. And on the other hand, of course, there is an urgency for adaptation assistance to small islands like Tuvalu. As you have seen, we have already started coastal protection, seawall projects, And you have seen, here on Funafuti, we are already doing a lot on our own.
Welcome everybody this evening. I welcome you warmly to our joint side event, Addressing Climate-Induced Displacement, Migration, Non-Economic Loss and Damage in Asia Pacific region. This event is hosted by the World Council of Churches, Climate Action Network South Asia, Bread for the World, Actionaid, and sorry that we missed one logo, it is Clean Energy Nepal. I'm glad that Rajan Thapa could make it to join us spontaneously this evening. And our fifth panelist, Harjeet, is also coming. Of course, we all have a lot of things to do. So nevertheless, we will talk about things that you have now partly, you got a glimpse in this video that was produced last year in Tuvalu, when I visited the Church of Tuvalu, and I got an idea what the people have to deal with, and that climate-induced migration is already a topic that they have to think about. And this is because, like, recent disasters, natural disasters by storms, for example, Cyclone Winston or Cyclone Pam, showed them the fragility and the vulnerability on the island states, but also the floods in Asia in this year, in this summer, showed that millions of people were affected by the floods in Nepal and Bangladesh, India. So we will get some background on the countries who are most affected by climate change. Now, on this panel, there are also other countries are most affected. So we will hear insights from living in Tuvalu from Mr. Tafue Lusama, he's the General Secretary of the Church of Tuvalu. And we got also a country case from Sanjay Vashist, who's the Director of Climate Action Network South Asia, and also a Nepalese perspective on loss and damage from Rajan Thapa. And then Harjeet, who is a real expert on the Warsaw mechanism on loss and damage, will give the whole debate, the policy recommendations, and Henrik Grape from the World Council of Churches will give ground to the debate from a moral and ethical perspective. So I think we have a very colorful panel, and this is not only due to the fact that we all have to merge our side events. That was real love from the beginning, that we thought we want to get like these perspectives together and show also the solidarity to the Fiji presidency, and also bringing in other examples from another region who is similarly affected. So then Tafue Lusama, you were already here in the interview. You said we will never be refugees, but if we have to migrate, we want to have a status as a climate-forced migrant. Please, I would like to give you the floor to outline this from a Tuvaluan perspective.
Thank you, Sabine. We say in Tuvalu Talofa, and welcome. As it had been said, my name is Tafue Lusama. I'm from Tuvalu, and we are the face of climate change. You talk about climate change, we live in the midst of climate change. We experience climate change every day. My country is 4 meters above sea level, and that is just the point. Most of the country is below that. We are being challenged from all aspects of life are under challenge because of the impacts of climate change, starting from the sea to the land, to the storms, the frequency and the intensity of cyclones visiting our shores, the intrusion of salt water into our underground waterlands, the bleaching of the corals around our coast, which removes our first line of defense against any wave surges, the bleaching of the corals therefore leads to the loss of our fish stocks as well. So we lose our only source of protein supply. Fishing expedition has become very expensive and you have to go further into the ocean. It's cheaper to buy a can of fish from the shop than to buy a fish from the market. We don't look at relocation as an option now because it carries a lot of risks. This, I can say for sure that you cannot build a country within another country. You cannot build Tuvalu within the borders of Germany. You cannot build a Tuvalu within the borders of Australia or New Zealand, even Fiji. Relocation to us means our literal death as a people, because we will lose our identity, our sovereignty, and our, this is the death of a people, because relocation will simply means that our people will assimilate into the communities they will be relocated to, and in a couple of generations they will lose their language, they will lose their culture, they will lose who they are. It's always good to migrate as long as there is a point back there where you refer to as home. But when your country goes underwater and you have no point of reference on the face of this planet, you are homeless. You are identityless. And we don't want to become third class or fourth class or fifth class citizens of a country. We prefer right now to put up the fight and remain in the negotiations to try and convince the international community to do all that is possible to save our country and to give us assurance of life continuity on our islands. As have been explained, this does not mean that we have to ignore the need to put plans in place in case it comes to the extreme. But right now, we don't know, personally for me, I'm not ready to throw in the white towel and say I surrender, because that is a signal that we are giving up on 1.5. 1.5 to us is life assurance. 2 degree centigrade does not assure us of life continuity. And that's why we are fighting for 1.5. And we need the international community to realize that to assure the safety and the security of the whole world, we have to start acting now. We have to do something urgently. If we ignore the plight of Tuvalu and our suffering under the impacts of climate change, we are ignoring what the world is going to face in the very near future. So we might as well start now by saving Tuvalu. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have a common sense that we're here because we want to have Paris implemented from the highest and not from the lowest, and that means 1.5. Why this is necessary will also outline Sanjay and speak about climate-induced migration in South Asia. Please, Sanjay.
Thanks, Sabine. Thanks, Tafue, for setting the scene. I think I'm going to speak on the similar lines very much, but how civil society in South Asia are mobilizing themselves to address this issue, knowing that mitigation is not enough, adaptation is also not enough, and adaptation has only one chance. So certainly at some places it is failing, which is leading to losses and permanent damages also. And that leads to climate-induced migration. The difficult part within the program that CANSA is working on is how to differentiate between the normal migration compared to climate-induced migration. However, we are making some efforts on that. Last year, we released a report in partnership with Actionaid International and Bread for the World, where we basically looked at South Asia as a whole, 4 countries as case studies on what are the trends and what are the policy gaps in 4 countries in South Asia, India, Nepal, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, in terms of addressing migration first and then of course climate-induced migration. And that report was launched last year in GFMDR with titled Climate Change Knows No Border. It's on the website, so please feel free to download it. That certainly is the first attempt where we looked at how drought, heat waves, cyclones, rising sea levels, irregular heavy rainfalls, and even slow onset phenomena like drought are causing migration. In fact, first of all, we started mapping pattern of migration, which we found to be complex and in different forms, like temporary migration after disasters, but then if disasters are one after another, there is a permanent migration also, seasonal migration to find work, internal migration within cities, to cities, from rural areas to cities, then transboundary migration, then external migration, and then of course impact after impact are also causing permanent migration. We have seen people shifting permanently to one place to another. And there are 2 kind of factors we identified. One is the push factor, one is the pull factor. So we started looking at push factor. Pull factor is brighter future, good livelihood, you have better education, you can earn better, so all those things. But push factor is more disaster induced. And which is so basically one is the planned migration, another is the forced migration, and forced migration is the one that we felt that we need to address. If we look at the existing laws and policies in South Asian countries, they do not sufficiently protect the rights of forced migration. They are vulnerable in terms of exploitation, in terms of discrimination, intolerance. In many places it's a political issue, insecurity, and of course lack of appropriate skills. And in fact, one of the analysts also said that skilled people in their native place becomes unskilled laborers, vulnerable to be exploited when they migrate. So that kind of dangerous situation they get in. So people in distress need to be protected, and of course there is a lack of access to schemes or services without locally registered IDs. They don't have any identities also. Policies fail to recognize and address additional burdens, hardships, or threats even to their families that are left back home. And that's where, so last year was more about mapping. This year we are gearing up to mobilize civil society for a joint advocacy. We felt that policies need to be changed, policies need to be more friendly in terms of protecting the legal right to the migrant. And now we have also added Pakistan also in our out of 8 countries, 5 countries will be working on. And we want to start with collecting evidence, because they are very excellent proof to demonstrate that migration is happening. It is climate induced. We know that migration has been going on for ages, but now the trend of migration has gone up. More people are migrating, and they need to be legal protection for them. Also engage with diverse stakeholders. I can see my media colleagues here, partner with media friends in doing stories, reaching out to people, spreading awareness through them, sensitizing them on the issue, rather than feeling that we don't want people coming to our cities, and we don't want to share opportunities or resources with us. It's basically giving a more human touch to it. And then of course engage with policymakers on what kind of policy instruments or frameworks need to be there, that can certainly give them protection, and that even if they migrate to a condition which is welcoming for them. So that's what we plan to do in next 3 years, and we are launching a program now. So I'll stop here now. Happy to answer related questions. Sabine.
Thank you very much, Sanjay. Then I give floor to Rajan from Nepal. So please tell us about your local background.
Yeah, thank you. I think I have already given the presentation, so I'm just waiting for the slide. Yeah, okay. Thank you. So, good evening and namaste. My name is Rajan Thapa. I'm working with the Clean Energy Nepal. Okay. Yeah, Clean Energy Nepal in Nepal. Basically, we are working on policy advocacy and research-based advocacy program in Nepal. So today, I'm going to discuss more about loss and damage issues in the context of Nepal. So in the year 2015, that was a scared year for us, because at that time we were suffering by earthquake, and in the year 2017, like just in recent monsoon, we suffered again by massive flood. So loss and damage issue is a huge issue for us, and not only the loss and damage issue, but also the other climatic factor that we need to focus in the negotiation process. So the basic outline of my presentation would be a possible threat of loss and damage, current status. Basically, I will be discussing on two aspects, research and findings, possible perspectives, and Nepal's strategic concern for loss and damage. So while talking about the context of Nepal, we all know that Nepal is listed one of the vulnerable countries in the world because of climate change, and it has poses additional challenges to the country's socio-economic perspective. We are not only vulnerable because of the mountain, because of the river, or because of the other biodiversity issues, but at the meantime, we are also lack of resources, technologies, and other infrastructures as well. And the meteorological background, it is a proof that we are suffering from climate change. Basically, the temperature, if we talk about the temperature rise trend, then we can find that the rate of temperature rise is about 0.05 degrees centigrade per year, like from 1971 to 2013. So the data was published by DHM, Department of Hydrology and Meteorology. So that means Nepal has some good data backup as well, but at the meantime, we are lacking in responding those incidents. And there was another projection by Ministry of Population and Environment in the year 2010, and it is saying that by 2030, the temperature will be raised by 1.2 degrees Celsius and 1.7 by 2050, and by 2100, like by the end of the century, it will be 3 degrees Celsius. So that means Nepal is truly in red circle. So precipitation pattern, the average rainfall has raised by 3.2%, or an average of 3.7 mm per month per decade. So the data is generated from 1975 to 2000, and that was by the international researcher. And the same as in seasonal annual precipitation, the highest decreasing trend is 0.3 mm per year. So there is a changes in a temperature. At the meantime, there is also changes in the precipitation pattern as well. Then the incident of climate change is in Nepal. So basically, like there is a issues of melting of glaciers. So in Nepal, like we have more than 3,000 glaciers covering 3,902 kilometers. So yes, Nepal is very much rich with mountains and a natural beauty. But at the meantime, we are very scared to preserve those kind of beautiful creature of Nepal nature. And out of 3,808 glacier lake, 21 lakes have been considered to be a very critical situation. So that means anytime it can be burst and swept whole the community situated at the lowland area, or basically at the lower community level. And the ice reserves in the Himalayan region have also decreased by 29%, and glacier areas by 24%. So yes, there are enough studies had been carried out by different institutions about melting of glacier lakes, and these are some other background info that 5 glacier lake bursted between 1977 to 1988, and there was a massive destruction, like not only in the poverty, but also in other aspect as well. And the accelerating melting rate of snow and glacier have an impact on water, obviously, flow in rivers, and Nepal is highly dependent on hydroelectricity, so obviously it will also affect it in this sector as well. In the Himalayas, melting glacier leads to increased flooding along the rivers of the region, affecting large region in South Asia, because as Sanjay had already discussed about the transboundary issues, so the India and China is very close to Nepal. So obviously, if these cases has again repeated, then obviously India will be also affected by this kind of incident. So this is a glimpse of Chorolpa Glacier Lake. It's located in Dolkha district. So flood and drought, so from 1988 to 2000, there was incident of 256 flooding incident per year, and the landslide incident was reported. And by that kind of incident, around 24,264 family annually affected. So there was a similar kind of incident of flood as well. Like because of climate change and because of other natural phenomenon, Nepal is day by day affected by those kind of natural destructions, or because of climate-induced disasters. So this picture was taken recently, like in our early monsoon season, and the whole airport of this Biratnagar area was flooded. So this kind of cases is repeating yearly. So we really need to discuss about these issues. So while giving the background and while discussing about the climate change issues in Nepal, now we have concluded that loss and damage is beyond adaptation and mitigation. Because we can adapt some kind of actions, or we can adopt mitigation measures, but loss and damage is something that we cannot, or we only cannot tackle with it. So there are other research findings, but it is very in limited number. So we really need to focus on those research and findings, and need to identify some possible solutions as well, like where we can hit and how we can mitigate the possible impacts. And the policy perspective, so we have a climate change policy, and basically, like in climate change policy, there is no any section where it has quoted about loss and damage issues, but there are similar lines which we can take it as a like a loss and damage issue, but the sentence or the whole policy is failed to address the loss and damage issue. And at the meantime, like when Nepal submitted its nationally determined contribution document in the year 2016, again, like there was no any other like a concrete plan to address the loss and damage issues. And Nepal also submitted its submission on possible activities under its strategic work stream, a 5-year working plan on loss and damage, which was very good initiative by government of Nepal, but still we really need to work further. So there are some policy gaps as well, lack of synergies between climate change policy and land use policy. Yes, we do have a climate change policy and we do have land use policy as well, but there is no synergy between these two policies. policy. Climate change policy, it basically deals with the climate-induced disaster, but a land use policy is totally separate. So what about if some community has to displace from one place to another? So that kind of phenomenon has not been discussed yet. And also about the policy of insurance, like the insurance company basically they give incentives to some kind of effect, but not to the whole. Not to the whole community, or not to cope with the other distractions. So what could be the Nepal's strategic concern then? So need to urge for the dedicated and adequate financial support and loss and damage through operating entities of financial mechanism of the convention and its protocol. Because as Nepal is least developed country, we surely need support, like in terms of resource, in terms of technology, or in terms of capacity. And avoid assessment and planning in isolation. So like Nepal need to focus not only at a national level, but also at the ground level and also at the international level. And the 5-year plan of the Warsaw mechanism is the concern of lost LDCs and Nepal. So we should aim at providing a platform for greater coordination and financial mechanism. And obviously, formulation of policy document and respond to climate-induced migration is key. So overall, Nepal always focus or always demand for climate justice, because we are vulnerable and we really need to grab support from developed country. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this country backgrounds and the struggles that you are facing with climate-induced loss and damage and migration. Harjeet, you are following the Warsaw mechanism on loss and damage very, very closely, and you also try to influence it, you analyze it very well, and there is now something we are waiting for, a 5-year work plan of this working group, and you have been actively involved. I've seen you fighting already for a long time for ambition in this working group. Please share your knowledge with us.
Thank you, Sabine. So we have listened to the stories of impacts from the ground. Let me start with saying that it has been very unfortunate that it took us several decades to reach a stage where we are discussing loss and damage as a separate stream. The issue was first raised by Tuvalu in 1991. The challenges of sea level rise, how climate is going to fail us, and how we need to start working on it early on. And they did quite a bit of work before presenting the kind of impacts we are going to face and the kind of actions that are required. Unfortunately, it only survived as a term insurance, and that too once in the convention document. And it took us several years, then there was a lull. AOSIS has done a huge amount of work to put a spotlight first on adaptation, because we all were very optimistic way back, several decades ago. We thought we will be able to deal with climate change by having strong actions on mitigation. The fact is we failed. And that's how 2001 onwards we started very strongly talking about adaptation, because by then we realized that the adaptation the mitigation that we were supposed to do earlier, we have not done enough of it. We are going to face impacts and we need to start adapting. While we recognized adaptation as a way to deal with climate impacts, we thought we will still have some impacts, but we can prepare ourselves for that. Unfortunately, that also didn't happen. 2001, way back in Marrakesh, provided us an excellent platform to prepare ourselves for the kinds of disasters we are talking about. I think as a humanity, we failed ourselves again. And just look at where we are and the kind of impacts that are hitting us. We had a lot of time to at least, if not avert the crisis entirely, but to at least arrest the speed at which climate has been changing and Earth has been warming. But now we see loss and damage as a third pillar. It's not something to feel happy about. In fact, it shows it's an epitome of a reality that we have been failing continuously for decades. And we are now talking about addressing loss and damage. While we talked specifically about it in 1991 as AOSIS countries, but we could make some progress only in 2008 when again AOSIS presented a multi-window mechanism on loss and damage. And it took us again several years, as you can understand, between 1991 and 2008, nothing substantive happened. One, because we were still hopeful probably that we'll be able to deal with it. And second, we did not realize the seriousness of the issue, and we did not act enough to tackle the issue. And finally, after a long fight, I don't want to get into a lot of background, but after a lot of fight, finally in 2013, we agreed to have a Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage. That's when we recognized that we cannot continue to ignore this reality of loss and damage. Now, even before we arrived at Paris Agreement, there were a lot of efforts to undermine the work on loss and damage that were still defined as nothing more than adaptation. And we had to fight again in Paris to put a spotlight on this issue and have it as an issue separate from adaptation. So now loss and damage, as you see in Paris Agreement, is a separate article. We again had a major challenge where the whole discussion around compensation has been put very negatively in the Paris decision. This is not the place to go into detail, but I would like to touch upon that, and I'm happy to elaborate later if required. And here we are, where we have a body, which is good. At least we now recognize that there's a challenge, and we have started unpacking it through this particular mechanism. So this mechanism is led by a committee called Executive Committee, which has 20 members. This committee has met 6 times by now, and really looking into the issue in detail. And the reason developing countries allowed to have some bit of focus away from the whole issue of compensation, because this issue required serious attention in terms of scientific knowledge, in terms of understanding the issue better, and collectively coming up with several solutions that are required. Let me list areas where now ExCom has been working on. We are looking into the issue of comprehensive risk management, as risk has been increasing, and we have to look at it, combine all the experiences that we have in the name of disaster management, disaster risk reduction, and linking it with sustainable development. The issue of non-economic losses has been recognized. So it's when we talk about losses and damages, it's not just about economic. When communities are going to lose their burial sites, their religious sites, trees that they love, the ecosystem they live in, we also need to understand what kind of non-economic losses they are going to face, and not just calculate everything in economic terms. So there's a body of work that's happening there. Slow onset events, again, we have been, the extreme weather events always get a spotlight, but not much discussion happens around the issues of sea level rise. Again, we are getting some attention, but how about increasing pace of desertification, ocean acidification, glacial melt? Unless and until they become a disaster, we are not looking into the issues of glacial melt, what Nepal, my colleague from Nepal was referring to. So there are a number of new challenges that we have in front of us, and we still don't have all the solutions as a global community. So we are now just beginning to scratch the surface when it comes to slow onset events. Issue of displacement, again, it's there. Good that as part of Paris Agreement, not as Paris Agreement, but Paris, the whole decision, we got a decision on establishing a task force on displacement. There is some work around that, and I'll come to that. And then the whole issue of finance. It's about means of implementation. It's about supporting countries to address loss and damage. Now, where we stand, 6 meetings have happened. As I said, last meeting happened in October. unfortunately, we have not made a lot of progress in terms of supporting countries. As ExCom, it has 3 functions. One is about knowledge generation, second one is about coordination, broadly speaking, and third one is about enhancing action and support. While there has been some progress on generating knowledge, coordinating with different institutions within and outside the convention, but hardly any progress on providing any support to developing countries. I'll give you an example. In Paris, we got 2 new mandates, one to establish a task force on displacement and another setting up a clearinghouse on risk transfer. On displacement, a task force has been set up, and in fact the members, I'll talk about that, list is very impressive, but the fact is we just have been able to have 1 meeting, and majority of work will happen next year, and only by next August we are going to hear from the committee. And this is about one of the most serious issues that we are facing as humanity. Whereas on insurance, which is about the clearinghouse on risk transfer, we are ready with the website. And we have made all the progress, and we are going to have a platform where private sector is going to be speaking to developing countries and develop new products around insurance and have more penetration in developing countries. Somehow, when we as developing countries participate in these decisions, we really wonder where the priorities are. You know, who are we most concerned about? Private sector or people who are dying, who are losing their lives and livelihoods every day? And we have listened to all those stories. So yeah, we do have a big challenge ahead of us. And if I bring you to the conversation that's happening here, yesterday, representatives from Africa, LDCs, and AOCs have made it very clear that we have made very, very little progress on the whole issue of action and support. And in fact, the ExCom itself has not been resourced to talk about the resource, because they are only meeting twice and they have a massive agenda and they are not able to discuss all aspects. They can't, create all kinds of committees and task forces that are required. They have a very limited mandate, and if that's the way we are going to go, we will not be able to achieve what this mechanism is supposed to achieve. So we do have a major challenge, one, in terms of making this mechanism fully operational, and second, focusing on action and support. So this is going to be a very important agenda. And as Sabine, you were asking about the 5-year work plan. Now, as part of 5-year work plan, we do have some of these elements, and this is a rolling work plan. We are already first year of the 5-year work plan. But the fact is, the way the whole focus on finance has been, we will not see much progress in the next 2 years, apart from just a technical paper coming out, that too in June. By that time, the intersession will have passed, and the only time to discuss that technical paper on finance, it's going to be the COP in 2019. Another 2 years. This year, nothing has happened on action and support. So we are extremely worried. On one hand, we have heard the kind of challenges we are facing on the ground. Now, sea is not waiting for us. Sea level continues to rise. Glaciers are melting. People are losing home. Displacement. We have been hearing reports after reports how the number of people that are displaced from these disasters have gone up. And it's an unprecedented situation we are living in. But the words that we hear from leaders and the action that we see on the ground are not really matching up. So I'm sorry, I don't have any good news for you.
Thank you, Harjeet. As climate action networks, as environmental organizations, as development organizations, as faith-based groups, as churches, we sit here united because we follow one objective, and this is the protection of the most vulnerable people from the impacts of climate change. And of course, we also want to have the protection of every person from the impacts of climate change, but the poorest are in the forefront, so our focus has to be on them. And the churches are also very active in calling for justice for the poorest. Please, Henrik, give us your perspective.
Thank you. I will try to keep it short, because I think we will have many interesting questions here, and I'm very thankful for all the panelists. And I am sort of the strange bird in this panel in some way, because I don't have any PowerPoints, I don't have all the facts. I am more reflecting like a theologian and from an ethical and theological perspective. First, I want to say that faith communities of different faiths, of different religions, are very much on the same page when it comes to climate change and how to act on them. At least you can see different kind of interfaith statement on climate change during the last years, and there is also around even this time. And that is not just for faith community to sort of come into the warmth and be with where everybody else is. I think this is very much an expression that faith communities are also the voices of what we have heard here, of people that actually see this on the ground. And what I have heard from all these panelists is very clear to me that the further away that you are from the climate effects, the more reluctance you find from negotiator or from people who don't want to hear the message. And that is one of our problems. How do these voices from Tuvalu, from I also could say indigenous people in the Arctic, from the Amazons, how do those voices be actually voices that are human voices that are actually telling a very important story to all of us, to the whole Earth? I think we are in a need for a new narrative, because everybody has a narrative today on where the world is going. And that I think that this narrative must also look at all the facts that actually been presented here, is also telling us something more than just the facts. I'm a bit fond of the concept of Anthropocene. The Anthropocene that say that we are in a new geological epoch, that says that humanity, that the humans are behind the steering wheel of the future for the whole planet. What we are deciding today is very much affecting the planet for the future generations. And in that case, if that's the case, some discussing it, if that's the case, our values, our decisions today and how we are guided by our decisions is of utmost importance today. As I would say that faith communities and also different kind of value-based organization is in a more important position than ever been before. So when faith communities bring the voices of people that actually experience the climate change effects, I think they should be listened to in a very drastic way, I would say. There is a discussion paper they call Non-Economic Loss and Damage, made by Brott for the Welt, ACT Alliance, World Council of Churches, and Lutheran World Federation. It's on the internet and you can download it. It's true, is it? Yeah, fine. And you can also, I think that is also some of the key to have a discussion about the non-economic losses and damage, because it is very easy that the economic language sort of guides us in the wrong way. And I can hear it from some of you panelists that you're actually saying that it's not enough with the compensation to get into the finance discussion. It's important. And it's just to say it's important that we have the mitigation, that we have the adaptation, and we have finance. But also, what do we mean when we actually lose our home, when we lose our roots? When we heard from Tuvalu, when you cannot compensate the loss of your holy places, of where your ancestors are buried, and that is another kind of loss and damage that I think also must be echoing in to all of us in the world to see what does it actually mean. It's not about they can move anyway. They can move to the country beside them, or they can move to Australia or to Germany. It's not just about a technical thing. It's much more rooted than that, and that is a sort of a spiritual identity that I think is much more important. And I also think that could be a driving force to actually to get this going. So to respond to Harjeet Singh, not optimistic. I'm not optimistic. But I'm a defiant hope, I would say, that we can actually, we have roots, we have different voices that I would say is very important in this question to make us act, to make us move forward. We need all of this great documentation that you have in this panel that you have brought to us, but we also need some kind of driving forces that come from an ethical move, that we need climate justice, that we need a possibility for a good life, that we need to have our roots to support people who wants to have their roots in the same where they come from. I think there is an urgency. I think we need to understand the seriousness of the situation, but also to get this going from just, we cannot negotiate with the planet. We have to understand we live on one planet, we live on this together. I just came from, we had in October in Iceland, we had a World Council of Churches meeting on the Arctic and climate change and making peace with Earth. And we had people from Fiji, and we had people from the North America Arctic, from the Nordic Arctic indigenous people, and they were telling the same stories. Even if they live on the quite opposite part of the world, they are affected of climate change in their different ways of living. And we have to listen to those voices. And I think they also have a kind of gift. I would say there is a gift from Tuvalu, from Pacific, from the Arctic indigenous people to say, you have to act now, you have to really act, we have to listen to these voices. And I think as faith communities, that is our duty, to actually give those voices a space to listen to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Henrik. In case that you want to give even more space to the voices, we highly appreciate if you Twitter and Facebook and message around. And there are some hashtags that we are using, like migration, displacement, loss and damage, COP23, but also our addresses are there, and we're happy if we are mentioned, and it is like at oikumene if you want to address the World Council of Churches, or CE_Nepal, or at Actionaid, at CANSA South Asia, or at Brot_für die Welt. Thank you. And now, and if you need any information on that, she can definitely help you. Maybe you raise your finger, then they know who you are. Wonderful. So I would love to open the floor now for questions, and we have microphones here. And please use the microphone. Just say your name. If you want to say, you can also say your background. So in the last row is here someone, and in the first row. So maybe Fenty, you go in the last, and Alina goes in the first, and in the last row. Please stand up. Please say your name.
Hello. My name is Kemi, and I'm actually a lawyer and PhD student on climatic migration issues, and especially on European politics. So I'm very interested about what you've said, and I really thank you about all your what you have said. I have a special question regarding the expectation of population who will be impacted by forced or just climatic displacement. And so I would like to have your point of view about what you could expect from EU policies, for example, to help you, and what's your primary needs. And what I understood is that there is very few which is made on this subject. And so I wanted to know, in your point of view, what can be done more from these EU countries to help you?
Thank you. We will collect some more questions. Please, the floor is to you, and the next will be you. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is V.K. Sharma, and I'm Professor of Disaster Management and Vice Chair of Sikkim Disaster Management Authority. I think I enjoy this, the whole panel discussion, and I think each panelist, gave wonderful case studies, here. My question is that I think they have given a broader idea, about the migration. In case you go in detail, because after disaster we have seen, we have case studies of droughts, we have case studies of earthquake of Nepal. If you go in detail and see, how the, for example, women, gender issue we are not discussing here. We are not discussing issue of children. We are not discussing, So there are many dimensions of this migration which is very, very critical. And I think Nepal earthquake was eye-opening, when we could see human trafficking, when we could see, the small children, how they were treated after the... So I think this is a very, very sensitive issue from human right point of view, and we are just seeing it, just one thing. Second thing is that I think in developing countries we are talking about political things, migration from neighboring countries and all that from one angle. We are not seeing it from climate change angle. We are not seeing it that in case there is 2050, when I was in the pavilion where Bangladesh is saying that several million people will be affected and will be migrated. So I think now there should be political discussion, there should be social discussion, there should be cultural discussion that what will happen when this kind of migration will happen, and what will be the impact, political impact, social impact, economic impact on the countries. So it's a very, very important discussion which is going on, and I think the panelists, should take it more seriously, and more case studies and more details are required. Actually, it will be very great academic exercise. I should say. Thank you very much.
Your intervention actually encouraged us and motivated us, and we know that we are on the right track of work. Thank you very much. Then the lady in the first row, and then
Hi there. Thank you first so much to the panelists for their very passionate and insightful interventions. My name is Erica Bauer, and I'm with the United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR. And UNHCR, amongst other agencies, is actually on the task force for displacement that was created by the WIM. So my question to Harjeet, but also to other panelists, our colleagues from Nepal, our colleague from Tuvalu, is what are you hoping to see out of the task force recommendations that will be issued by COP24, so December of next year in 2018? Thanks.
In the last row, please.
Hi, my name is Ben Thomas. I'm an atmospheric chemist with the Walker Institute. My question relates to when Reverend Lusama brought up the fact that even if you could save all of the people in Tuvalu by moving them somewhere else, that you would lose the group identity, that the kind of nationhood, the group would be lost. And it made me think that it's understood that group identities are fairly malleable, and that under conditions of stress, particularly if migration is induced, there can often be a kind of fusive stress on group identities, and they can merge together into larger supergroup identities as individuals renegotiate their membership of certain national or ethnic groups. Do you think this could happen in Southeast Asian states as a response to climate change? And if so, do you think it would put do you think it would put island states in a stronger negotiating position? And even if it did, would you welcome it, as it would result in some blurring of group identities?
Please, I'm happy to take more interventions, comments. Next to her is always the last and the first row, maybe also from the middle field wants to come up with a question. Please, hello, please.
Yeah, hello. My name is Dietmar Merkes from Action Solidarité Tiers-Monde in Luxembourg, a development NGO. Thank you for your very good presentations on the panel. A question to Harjeet Singh. Your point of, thank you for your skeptical, realistic documentation of what had happened. What do you think, what could be the best outcome of this COP for the 5-year plan, and what can we do to come there?
There in the back, there's Mr. and oh, hello.
Hello, everybody. I'm a citizen from a country victim of climate-induced disasters like flood. At the same time, from Nepal, and at the same time, I'm working in Fiji. In Fiji, if you travel northeastern islands, still around 40,000 people are still sitting in temporary shed due to hit by Winston 2016. And I was quite happy when Mr. Singh was presenting until the last 2 minutes that you said that non-economic loss and damage was quite addressed. But when I see Sabine in front of her Bread for the World, but I would say that millions of people at the moment, they are waiting bread for the compensation, what is induced by climate disasters. So my question will be, how many crops and how many years the people, they should be still living in a shade and waiting the compensation for bread? Just I want to hear your opinion.
Bulavinaka, my name is James from the Methodist Church in Fiji. Just two questions. One is regarding the work that is being done on the issue of displacement. I was recently, just the day before I flew out of Fiji to come, long flight, halfway around the world, like all of us from the Pacific. But there was the regional meeting for the group Asia Pacific on the Global Compact on Migration. And I know it's not a binding thing, it's a compact. But I'm just wondering if that plays any role in things like global compacts, play any role in underpinning the work that is being done. And we noticed that in the compact, there is nothing on climate-induced migration, and one of the recommendations of the outcomes was that be brought in. Then my second, I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but I'm just responding to some of the statements. The stories are the lived realities of people, and even in Fiji today, I was reminded that there are 45 communities earmarked for relocation, with some 600 to be surveyed and checked on relocation. The more we wait, the more communities will be displaced. Naka.
Thank you. So I would give now the audience around the panelists a chance to answer, and then we can do another round. So I start with Harjeet.
I thought you were going to start with the other side. The first question was expectation from Europe. I'm sure other colleagues would chip in. I think our expectations from Europe and other developed countries are not very different, but we would definitely like Europe to take a lead, because the kind of crisis that Europe particularly felt in terms of Syrian refugees, some of us have been saying it's a preview of what's going to happen in the decades to come. And the role Europe has to play is to make sure that we have very substantive and tangible progress made in the work on displacement. And let me unpack this a little bit. When you read the language related to displacement in Paris Agreement, we are using 3 terminologies: avert, minimize, and address. Now, when we talk about averting, that's where it's linked to mitigation and all the discussion that we are doing around emission gap and how to close the gap and raising ambition. This is where we should be able to avert displacement. No, it's indirect. We are not, but mitigation is clearly linked. If temperature continues to rise, if impacts continue to rise, we will see more displacement. And avert is also linked with part of the adaptation work. How much you are able to work with the communities, prepare them well in advance so that they don't get displaced. or they are forced to migrate. Before I go to the second one, and when you say people really getting worried, the fact is when you go back and talk to communities, nobody would like to willingly get displaced. In fact, the term displacement has the part of forced migration embedded into it, right? You are displaced means there has been some force that got used to displace you. It was not, you were not willingly removed from that place, right? People would like to live in their own cultural context, social context. It's the situations that are forcing them to leave their homes and change their livelihoods. The reason I'm saying this is more work we do in supporting communities to help minimize the impact of loss and damage and climate change. People would not like to migrate, and then the challenge that we are likely to see in future can be taken care of if we are able to minimize the impact on them. If their livelihood is not lost, if their house doesn't get submerged, if they don't lose their income, they will not be migrating. So, which means a lot more focus on the work around adaptation and resilience building. That's where the second term comes in, about minimizing displacement. A lot of work that can be done around social protection, for example. And the third bit is about addressing. Now, this is where we listen to stories from Tuvalu, where you have no option, or Fiji, where we have to relocate people permanently. Now, that's where we need to start looking into their human rights and what needs to happen, what kind of new livelihoods, the challenges about their identity. Now, that's a totally different ballgame. So we need to look at the entire issue in totality, and these three terminologies really connect the work on displacement in terms of mitigation, adaptation, and role that all these aspects that are going to play. So what we need to do is to provide a lot more support. So to tackle displacement, we need to continue to work on mitigation, raise our ambition, provide a lot more resource at the local level, so that we all know the patterns of migration, right? If people who are living in a small hamlet don't have enough resources, they go to a bigger village, from there to a town, from there to a city, and then they also need to cross borders if there's not much opportunity. So more we do at the local level, more resources we provide, we will be able to tackle the issue of displacement to a large extent, right? Then the proportion of people who are forced to migrate will be smaller. Sir, as Professor Sharma, you talked about that this issue is huge and there are so many dimensions. You're absolutely right. We have just begun to scratch the surface. And we do discuss about issues of women and children. So your suggestion of looking into all different aspects of social, economic, environmental, of course, we will be taking into account, and situation that we are seeing in our region is extremely complex, and that's true for several other regions. There was another question specifically for me from Eric about what specifically we want the task force to do. In fact, we have been engaging in the discussions at ExCom level, and we did provide several inputs, and many of them have been taken on board, except one big one, which I continue to raise in all different forums, and I'm going to highlight here. So if you look at the list of things that task force is going to do, a majority is about mapping. It's about mapping, looking into impacts, looking into whether different policies and practices are looking into the issue of displacement. For example, national adaptation plans are being prepared, whether they have looked into the scenarios where what kind of displacement pattern they're going to see. So looking into all kinds of policies at national, regional, in terms of displacement, regional becomes extremely important, regional as well as international. The task force is also going to look into the institutional capacity and mapping of different institutions, the role different institutions can play, which is again good. It will also look into the baseline and different data and analysis, and then it will develop recommendations for the ExCom. Now, what it does not take into account is the temperature rise scenarios. I have not heard that language. We made that point several times in the ExCom, that unless you link the future projections on displacement with the temperature rise scenarios, we will not be able to grapple with the scale that we are going to see. And we can't close our eyes. We can't think that it's going to be 1.5, 2 degree scenario. We have to prepare ourselves where we really are. The reality is we are moving to a 3 degree warmer world. And 3 degrees is not going to be 3 times of what we are seeing today. I don't know how many times it the impact would be. So that is a major miss that we have, and I think task force need to find a way. And another recommendation that we are making, that this task force should ideally become a permanent body to advise the ExCom and the WIM process. So right now it has a sunset clause that you provide recommendation and vanish. Sorry, the issue is going to be there. How can you see an institution that is now getting created, a process that can go away? So we need to also then make sure how these recommendations are going to be included. Sorry, most of the questions for me, so I'm... I don't want to take so much of airtime. Then what are we expecting from... did I answer your question? Yes. Okay. So on COP23, what we are expecting, I would say particularly in terms of finance, on displacement we can't do much. The plan has been set, let's not disturb that. We are late, we have been very slow, but now we see by August there will be a report, so let's go by that. And we have kind of reconciled to that fact. But in terms of finance, the plan that has been put forward by the ExCom, as I was saying earlier, nothing much is going to happen for the next 2 years except that technical paper. We made recommendations that ExCom can work very closely with the Standing Committee on Finance. You should know there is no definition of loss and damage finance. We have seen, because of the absence of proper definition, what happens. Last year we saw OECD report saying we are very close to meeting our obligation of $100 billion a year. So if you don't have specific definition, if you don't define what loss and damage is and where to put finance for loss and damage, we will continue to see all these botched up methodologies and double counting happening. So the ExCom needs to work very closely with the Standing Committee on Finance, start looking into definition, start exploring sources. We need to have a range of instruments. Insurance has only little role to play. The moment you start talking about the slow onset events, insurance doesn't work. The probability is 100%. It's not going to work. We are going to see a lot of fanfare next week, but the fact is it's not enough. So we need to have a very constructive discussion on the range of instruments. Nobody has answers. Nobody knows, trust me. That's why you need a very constructive discussion, and that discussion has to begin like yesterday, and we are wasting time. So what we need from here is a clear political guidance. We don't want COP to reopen the plan. That will not be productive, because ExCom has worked hard to reach where it is right now, but provide additional guidance. We are urging Fiji to have an international initiative, a 2-year international initiative on loss and damage finance, so that it goes over and above what ExCom is doing. It requires political guidance. Let's not make loss and damage finance just a technical issue. That's what we need here to happen. I think I'll leave others for the rest, but if there's something to say on non-economic, I can come back.
Yeah, thank you very much, Harjeet, for this comprehensive answer. And as you finished, it is not only about loss and damage finance, but also other topics. And I think that is what your question referred to, Lusama, Tafue Lusama, right? Because you said when you have to resettle, then the loss of identity and culture, this is exactly what they don't want. So your question was, what do they want instead, right?
Yeah, whether they think
sorry.
Yeah, so I was mainly asking if you think that there's going to be a renegotiation of group identities in the region as a response to climate change, and if that might strengthen the negotiating position of the states, and whether that, would be in some ways a good thing or not.
Thank you for the question. I thought the technicalities of the question has been responded to by, but on a very simple note, I would say it won't help. We prefer to be where we are and who we are, and we would like to push the international community to have the political will to tackle the problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a clear answer. Yeah, avoided, simply avoided. Please, Sanjay.
Yeah, thank you. On question from James. global compact on migration, basically where countries come together, they acknowledge the problem, that it is the problem and we need to have a safe, orderly migration. I think it certainly helps to an extent that at least countries are acknowledging that this phenomena is happening because of loss and damage and inadequate mitigation adaptation. From the South Asian perspective, it's only Bangladesh which acknowledges the migration is going to be a problem in future, and other countries don't want to talk about it. Though migration is happening, internal displacement is also happening, and these are sometimes issues of conflict within the societies. So by acknowledging the problem, so basically right diagnose. Now it's time to treat the problem. Though the compact, global compact on migration talks about safe and orderly migration, fine, but then it also need to talk about resettlement and rehabilitation, and resettlement and rehabilitation of migrants to an extent with a dignified life and safety. So that's the next thing that we should expect from them. Thank you.
Please. Yeah.
So there was a question when I probably you misinterpreted me. I did not say, so there was a question from our Nepali friend, if I remember correctly. I did not say that the issue of non-economic loss has been settled. What I meant was that at EXCOM, it has found a home. There's a recognition that we have to look beyond economic losses, and the issue is being unpacked and a body of work has already started. So at least we know there is a place where we can go and contribute and engage with it and unpack it. Again, this is such a massive issue. We have not even scratched the surface. There are so many new dimensions we are going to see going forward. So there is a body of work that's happening, and there are a couple of organizations involved. So we need to continue to engage. There are different ways of looking at it. You can have some financial ways to deal with non-economic losses, but you may not have all financial ways to deal with non-economic losses. So there are a number of things that are emerging. Your question was how many cops? I don't know. It all depends on us. And what we have not seen, we also allowed certain opportunities to be missed because we never made that as an important issue. It's only the reason we got Warsaw International Mechanism in 2013 because of the mobilization we had in 2012 in Doha. Unfortunately, when we saw nothing was working, and if I remind you briefly, Kyoto was being conveniently killed in Doha in 2012. Fast start financing was ending after 2009. It was a 3-year cycle of fast start financing. No new round was being committed. And Philippines was hit by 16th cyclone in a year called Cyclone Bofa. Africa was reeling from the impacts of Sahel region drought and Eastern Horn of Africa drought. That brought everybody together. That's when we realized nothing was happening on mitigation, no next round of money coming in. What we have started facing, and it's not just for AOSIS, Africa faced the crisis, and even developing countries, big developing countries like Philippines. That's when we came together. That's when we brought about a change. Because we, as the global community, prioritized to have some meaningful decision on loss and damage. And that's when it was agreed that it will be established next year. And again, there was a mobilization in Warsaw. There was a pressure not to have it. So how many cops, again, it all depends on us. I think we have the responsibility to make sure that this issue remains political. And next week, when ministers are going to come, all of us need to make noise and say, keep it as a political priority. It's about life and death. And if not now, then when? It's Fiji. That's the presidency. That is representing the interest of most vulnerable nations. So I think we all should also engage with Fiji and the presidency and say, let's not leave this place without having a tangible agreement on loss and damage in general and finance in particular. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We promise to be out of the room in time, and therefore I would like to give the panelists now the opportunity to say final words before we have to rush out. And I would like to hear now a very, very short comments, less than 2 minutes. You have less than 2 minutes. You have actually 1 minute, 1.5 if I see the time. So what is it, what you want to see from this COP here getting out, not only from the agenda, also what you want to see like on a broader perspective, from all the action that is going on here. What is your expectation?
So I would not say much. So I just expect 3 words only: cooperation, coordination, and collaboration.
In that spirit, Sanjay.
Thank you. Well, I think from COP, well, Harjeet follows that more aggressively. I can talk about South Asia again, where countries need to acknowledge it as a problem. South Asia is a sub-regional subcontinent, we call it, 8 countries, and we have a SAARC body there, and SAARC need to play an active role on this issue because it's all about regional cooperation that is required. We are pushing for regional cooperation on adaptation, but then we are also going to push for regional cooperation on safe migration, or at least to have the humane approach towards people who are migrating under distress. And that's what we are going to do for next 3 years. So look forward to have partners from this group who is attending this. Thank you.
Thank you. Henrik.
Out of this COP, I hope that I've been to many COPs before, and it looks very much the same every time. But my hope is actually that the urgency and also the voices that we have heard here, and voices from those actually are the climate victims and the most vulnerable, must be listened to much more, and also that this starts a reaction to actually act. And I think that my hope is, as this COP with the Fiji presidency will sort of get this going, because I think that we are too slow to actually act on this. And I hope that faith communities of whatever faith can also be a driving force to actually take steps forwards.
Thank you, Henrik.
Might be my last words here, but not in life. Not only for COP, but I would like to see a global support and solidarity for countries like Tuvalu and the other low-lying, vulnerable countries around the world. That needs to be translated into action and financial support for adaptation. And if it comes to displacement, then we need to put our support there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The room is full from my perspective. This is not a half-full class. It's an overloaded room with people who share the same interest, the same sympathy and solidarity. That's a good sign for us and our work. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much also for your contribution and interventions. We are here, we are around. Everyone who wants to talk to us is very welcome to do so. Thank you and good evening.